Martin Hyde, The Duke's Messenger, Part 2 by John Masefield. Chapter 20. The Squire's House. "There," he said, not unkindly, "there's a nice little 'ome for ye. Now you, tell me what you were doing spying on me. First of all, 'ave you any money?" He did not wait for me to answer, but dug his hands into my pockets at once, taking every penny I had, except a few shillings which were hidden in my belt. He did not see my belt, as I had taken to wearing it next my skin since I began to follow the wars. I feared from the greed which showed in all his movements that he was going to strip me, but he did not do so, thinking, no doubt, that none of my clothes would fit his body. "Well," he said, in his snarling beast voice, "what's up 'ere with all these folk brought their beasts 'ere?" I told him that the Duke had come cold fight for the crown of England, with the result, as I supposed, that the country people dared not trust their livestock at home for fear of having them pillaged. He seemed pleased at the news, but being an utter wild beast, far less civilized than the lowest savage ever known to me, he showed his pleasure by hoping that the rich, whom he cursed fluently, might have their heads pulled off in the war, while as for the poor, the farmers close by us, he hoped that they might lose every beast they owned. "Do era good," he said. "Now," he went on, "are you come spying ere along of the farmers?" "No," I said, "I am a servant of the Duke's, riding out to look for the militia." "Ah," he said, "are yer cocky?" "Oh, am I to know that?" "Well," I said, "look at my hands. Are they the hands of a farmer?" "No," he said. "No, Mr. Stuck-up Flunky, they ain't." "I s'pose yet proud of yet ants. I'll lave your wait at table on me." He seemed to like the notion, for he repeated it many times, while he dug out hunks of cold ham with his file, from the meat which I had felt as I crawled in. "'Ow proud I'd dig onk a cold pig," he sang as he gulped the pieces down. It was partly a nightmare, partly very funny. I was not sure if he was mad. Probably he was mad, but being down in the burrow there in the half-darkness, hearing that song, made me feel that I was mad. It was all a very terrible joke. Perhaps madness affects people like that. At last I spoke to him again. "Sir," I said, "I've been up since 2 this morning. Give me a hunk of cold pig, too. I'm half-starved. 'Elp yourself, can't yer?" he snarled. "Ooh, am I to wait on yer?" Then, very cunningly, he put in, "Have you got a knife on yer?" "No," I said cautiously, "I've got no knife," which was a lie. I did not wish my knife to go the same way as the money. He gave me some cold pig, very excellent. Ham it was, too, for which I was very thankful. He watched my greediness with satisfaction. I ate heartily when I saw that my confident way with him had made him more tender towards me. "Yes," he snorted, "per'aps you ain't been lying to me after all. Now, 'ow long will these blokes be up the 'ill? I did not know that, but I suppose that they would go home directly the Duke's army had got as far, say, as Taunton. But," I added, "the Duke may be beaten. If he's beaten, all this part will be full of troops beating every bush for the rebels." He swore at this, that his curses were only designed to hide his terror. "Could a fellow get to sea," he said in a whining tone. "Could a poor fellow in trouble slip away to sea, now, at one of these seaport towns? Boy, I've been livin' like a wild beast all the way from Bristol, this 2 months. I didn't kill the feller. Not dead. The knife only went into a very little way, not more'n an inch. I was raised near air at a farm, so I knowed of this air burrow. I got 'ere 2 days ago, pretty near dead. Now I've been pinned up from the sea by these farmers comin' airy, doin' swattin' sentry, go all round me. I tell yer I'll cut up sour if they pin me in. Now I'm so near got away. I been with Avery. They call Avery a pirate. They said I was a pirate. It's 'anging if they catch me. Do you think I could get away to Lyme or some place to get took into a ship?" I told him no, because I knew from what Lord Grey had told me that the Channel was full of men of war searching every ship which hove in sight. Besides, he did not look to me to be a very promising hand for a captain to take aboard. All the same, he said, I got to risk it. You say there may be troops coming? As per that, I answered, the troops may be here at any moment from Exeter or Honiton. They've arrested hundreds of people everywhere around. You'd better stay in the borough here. He did not pay much attention to what I said. He cursed violently, as though he were a bagpipe full of foul words being slowly squeezed by some player. At last he crawled to the passage, foaming out incoherently that he would show them, he would, let them just wait. You stay 'ere, he said. If I find you follerin' me, I'll mash your 'ead into that much slobber. He showed me a short piece of rope which he had twisted, sailor fashion, so as to form a handle for a jagged piece of flint which, as I could see, had been used on someone or something quite recently. Mogador Jack, he said. He don't like people follerin' him. With that he left me alone in the burrow, wondering, now that it was over, why he had not killed me. He left me quite stunned. His sudden coming into my life had been so strange. It was unreal, like a dream, to have been in an ancient Britain's burial chamber with a mad old pirate who had committed murder. But now that he had gone, I was eager to go too, if it could be managed. I would not stay there till the brute came. Back, in spite of that flint club, after waiting some little time, during which I felt sure he was waiting for me at the door of the burrow, I took out my pistol. I examined the charge to see that all was well. Then very cautiously, I began to crawl up the passage with my pistol in my hand. I waited for some minutes near the door, trying to convince myself by the lie of the shadows outside that he was crouched there, ready for me. But it seemed safe. I could see no shadow at all except the tremulous fern shadows. At last I took off my coat as a blind. I flung it through the doorway with some force to see if it would draw him from his hiding. Nothing happened. The ruffian did not pounce upon it. I took a few long breaths to hearten me. It was now or never. I shut my eyes, praying that the first 2 blows might miss my head so that I should have time to fire. Then, on my back, with my pistol raised over my head, I forced myself out with every muscle in my body. I leaped to my feet on the instant, quickly glancing round for the madman swinging my pistol about with my finger hard on the trigger. He was not there after all. I might have spared myself the trouble. I was alone there in the fern, within earshot of a murmur of voices talking excitedly. I was not going to spy into any more secrets. I was going to get out of that camp, cost what it might. I made one rush through the fern in the direction of the rampart, shoving the stalks aside, as a bull knocks through jungle in Campeche. In 30 steps I was clear of the fern, charging slap into a group of people who were giving brandy to the sentry whom I had passed but a little while before. He was bleeding from a broken wound on his pretty hard Saxon skull. He was not badly hurt, for he was swearing lustily, but he had been stunned just long enough for my pirate man to strip him. He was dressed now in a pair of leather gaiters. All the rest of his things had been taken, the pistol with them. I saw all this at a glance as I charged in among them. I took it all in, guessing in one swift gleam of comprehension exactly what had happened there, as my pirate made his rush for freedom. There was no time to ask if my guess were right or not. "Out of my way!" I shouted, shoving my pistol towards the nearest of the group. "Out of my way, or I shall fire!" They made way for me. I charged downhill by the way I had come. Someone cried, "Stop in!" Another shouted, "Shoot in, maester!" There came a great bang of a gun over my head. But I was going downhill like a rabbit, into the gorse, into the bracken, into the close cover of the heath. Glancing back, I saw a dozen excited people rushing down the rampart after me. Some flung stones, some ran to catch horses to chase me. But I had the start of them. I was down the hill, over the hedge, in the lane in no time. There, 100 yards away, I saw my friends the troopers leading my cob. I shouted to them. They heard me. They came up to me at a gallop. In 10 seconds more we were sailing away together. "You been getting into scrapes, master," said one of the troopers. "You do it. Want to meddle with the folk in these parts?" "No," said the other with a touch of insolence in his voice. "So your master may find, one of these fine days." Being mindful of the Duke's honor, I told the man to mind his own business, which he said he meant to do, without asking my opinion. After that we rode on together a little heated till we were out of sight of the combe, where I had had such a startling adventure. After another hour of riding, we pulled up at the garden gate of an old gray handsome house which stood at some distance from the road. I asked one of the troopers who lived in this house. He said that it was an old abbey which belonged to Squire, but that we were to leave word there of the Duke's movements, for Squire be very attached to the Protestants. Besides, he'll give us a breakfast. Sure to. We left our horses at the gate while we walked up to the house. A pretty girl who seemed to know one of the men told us to come in, while she got breakfast for us. Squire, she said, would be glad to hear what was going on, for he was that given up to the soldiers we couldn't hardly believe. We were shown down a long flagged corridor to a little cool room which looked as though it had once been the abbot's cell. It had a window in it, looking out upon a garden in full flower, a little rose garden, covered with those lovely bushes of old English red single roses, the most beautiful flower in the world. The window was large, but the space of it was broken up by stone piers, so that no pane of glass was more than 6 inches wide. I mention this now because of what happened later. There was not much furniture in the room, but what there was very good. There was an old Dutch pewter jug full of sweet williams on the table. On the wall there was a picture of a Spanish gentleman on a cream-colored, fat, handsome little horse. Together they looked very like Don Quixote out for a ride with his squire. The 2 troopers left me in this room while they went off to the kitchen. Presently the servant came in again, bringing me a noble dish of breakfast, a pigeon pie, a ham, a jar of preserved quince, a honeycomb, a great household loaf, newly baked, a big quart jug full of small beer. I made a very honest meal. After eating, I examined the room. There was tapestry over one part of the wall. It concealed a little low door which led to what had once been the abbot's fish pond, now a roofed-in bathhouse where one could plunge into 8 feet or so of bitterly cold spring water. This bathhouse was some steps lower than the little dining room. It was lighted by a skylight directly over the bath. It had no other window whatever. After examining the bath, wishing that I had known of it before eating, I went back to the dining room, where the servant was clearing away the food. "I hope you enjoyed your breakfast, sir," she said. "Yes, thank you very much indeed," I answered. "Squire will be downdercly, sir," she said, "if you will please to make yourself at home." I made myself at home as she desired, while she, after a few minutes, took away the soiled plates, leaving all the other things on the sideboard ready for dinner. I noticed that she smiled in a rather strange way as she drew to the door behind her. I loitered away about half an hour, waiting for the squire to come. As he did not come, I turned over the books on the shelves, mostly volumes of plays, the Spanish tragedy, the Laws of Candy, Love Lies a Bleeding, etc., 4 plays to a volume in buckram covers. I was just getting tired of All for Love when I heard a footstep in the passage outside. I thought that I would ask the passenger, whoever it might be, for how much longer the squire would keep me waiting. I was anxious about getting back to the army. It was dangerous to straggle too far from the Duke's camps when unbeaten armies followed on both his wings. So I went to the door to learn my fate at once. To my great surprise, I found that I could not open it. It was locked on the outside. The great heavy iron lock had been turned upon me. I was a prisoner in the room there. Thinking that it had been done carelessly, I beat upon the door to attract the man who passed down the passage, calling to him to turn the key for me so that I might get out. The footsteps did not pause. They passed on, down the corridor, as though the man were deaf. After that, of fury came upon me. I beat upon the door for 5 minutes on end, till the house must have rung with a clatter. But no one paid any attention to me. Only, far away, I heard a woman giggling, and an interval when I had paused for breath. The door was a heavy, thick oak door, bound with iron. The lock was a bar of steel at least 2 inches thick. There was no chance of getting it open. Even firing into the lock with my little pistol would not have helped me. It would only have jammed the tongue of steel in its bed. I soon saw the folly of trying to get out by the door, so I turned to the window, which was more difficult still, or, if not more difficult, more tantalizing, since it showed me the free garden into which one little jump would suffice to carry me. But the closely placed piers of stone made it impossible for me to get through the window. It was no use trying to do so. I should only have stuck fast midway. I began at once to pick out the mortar of the pier stones with my knife point. It was hopeless work, though, for the old monks had used some cement a good deal harder than the stones which it bound together. I could only dig away a little dust from its surface. That way also was barred to me. Then I went down to the bathing chamber, hoping that there would be some way of escape for me there. I hoped that the escape pipe of the bath might be a great stone conduit leading to a fish pond in the garden. It was nothing of the sort. It was a little miserable leaden pipe. I beat all round the walls, praying for some secret door, but there was nothing of any use to me, only a little iron ventilator high up, big enough to take my head, but nothing more. As for the skylight over the bath, it was beyond my reach, high up. For the moment, I could see no means of getting to it. I went back to the dining room to give another useless pounding to the door. My head was full of miserable forebodings, but as yet I suspected merely that I had been caught by some sudden advance of militia. Or perhaps the squire had laid plans to get information from one who knew the duke. Perhaps I had been lured away specially by one hungry for the king's good opinion. Or could it be Aurelia? Whatever it was, I was trapped. That was the terrible thing. I was shut up there till my enemy, whoever it was, chose to deal with me. I was in arms against the ruling king of England. Everybody's hand would be against me, unless my own hands helped me before my enemies came. My first thought was to get the table down the steps, to make a bridge across the bath, from which I could reach the skylight. This I could not do at first, for being much flustered, I did not put the table leaves down. Until I knocked them down in my hurry, they kept me from dragging the table from the dining room. When I got it at last into the bathroom, I found that it would not stretch across the water. The legs were too close together, as I might have seen had I kept my wits about me. I could think of no other way of getting out. I went back disheartened to the dining room, dragging my coat behind me. The first thing which I saw was a letter addressed to me in a hand already known to me. The letter lay on the floor on the space once covered by the table. As it had not been there when I dragged the table downstairs, someone must have entered the room while I was away. I opened the letter in a good deal of flurry. It ran as follows: Dear Martin Hyde, as you will not take a sincere friend's advice, you have to make the best of a sincere adviser's friendship. You did me a great service. Let me do you one. I hope to keep you an amused prisoner until your captain is a beaten man. By about 3 weeks from this 26th of June, we shall hope to have made you so much our friend that you will not think of leaving us. May I make a compact with you? Please do not shoot me with that pistol of yours when I bring you some supper tonight. That is one part of it. The other is this: let us be friends. We know all about you. I have even talked to Ephraim about you, so let us make it up. We have been 2 little spitfires. At any rate you have. Let us be friends. What sorts of books do you like to read? I shall bring you some story books about ghosts or about Red Indians. Which do you like best? I like Red Indians myself. I suppose you, being a man, like ghosts best. Your sincere friend Aurelia Carew, who by the by thinks it best to warn you that you had not better try to get up the chimney, as it is barred across. She hopes that the table did not fall into the bath. Chapter 21. My friend Aurelia and her uncle. It was a friendly letter, which relieved me a good deal from my anxieties, but what I could not bear was the thought that the Duke would think me a deserter. I made up my mind that I would get away from that house at the first opportunity, so as to rejoin the Duke, to whom I felt myself pledged. But in the meantime, until I could get away, I resolved to make the best of my imprisonment. I was nettled by Aurelia's tone of superiority. I would show her, as I had shown her before, that my wits were just as nimble as hers. A few minutes after the letter had been read, she held a parley with me through the keyhole. "Mr. Martin Hyde, are you going to shoot me?" "No, Miss Carew, though I think you deserve it. You won't try to get away if I open the door." "I mean to get away as soon as ever I get half a chance. I've got 3 men with me at the door here." "Oh, very well, but you just wait till I get a chance." "Don't be so bloodthirsty, Mr. Martin Hyde. Now I'm coming in to talk with you. No pistols, mind, not one. I've promised I won't shoot. You might believe a fellow. But I mean to get away, remember, just to show you." She opened the door after that, a brown, merry Aurelia, behind whom I could see 3 men ready to stop any rush. They closed the door behind her after she had entered. "Well," she said, smiling, "will you not shake hands with me, Martin Hyde?" "Yes," I said, "I will shake hands, but you played a very mean trick, I think. There, you mustn't think me mean," she answered. "I don't like mean people. Now promise me one thing. You say you are going to run away from us. You won't run away from me when I am with you, will you?" "No," I said, after thinking this over, to see if it could be twisted into any sort of trap, likely to stop my escape. "I will not while I am with you." "That's right," she said. "We can go out together then. Now you've promised. Suppose we go out into the garden." We went into the garden together, talking of every subject under the sun, but the subject nearest to our hearts at the moment. I would not speak of her capture of me. She would not speak of the Duke's march towards Taunton. There was some constraint whenever we came near those subjects. She was a very merry, charming companion, but the effect of her talk that morning was to make me angry at being trapped by her. I looked over the countryside for guiding points in case I should be able to get away. Axminster lay to the southeast, distant about 6 miles. So much I could reckon from the course of our morning's ride. I could not see Axminster, for I was shut from it by rolling combs, pretty high, which made a narrow valley for the river. To the west, the cones were very high, strung along towards Taunton in heaps. Due east, as I suspected, quite near to us, was Shard, where by this time the Duke must have been taking up his position. Taunton, I judged from a milestone which we had passed to be not much more than a dozen miles from where I was. I have always had a pretty keen sense of position. I do not get lost. Even in the lonely parts of the world I have never been lost. I can figure out the way home by a sort of instinct helped by a glimpse at the sun. When I go over a hill I have a sort of picture memory of what lies behind. To help me home again, however tortuous my path is on the other side. So the few glimpses which I could get of the surrounding country were real helps to me. I made more use of them than Aurelia suspected. We were much together that day. Certainly she did her best to make my imprisonment happy. In the evening she was kinder. We were more at ease together. I was able to speak freely to her. "Aurelia," I said, "you risked your life twice to warn me." "That's not quite true, Martin," she said. "I am a government spy trusted with many people's lives. I had other work to do than to warn a naughty boy who wanted to see what the ghosts were. I was startled at her knowing so much about me." She laughed. "Well," she said, "I like you for it. I should have wanted to see them myself, but the ghost makers are scattered far enough now." "All the same, Aurelia," I said, "I thank you for what you did for me. I wish I could do something in return." She laughed. "Well," she said, "you were very kind in the ship. You were a good enemy to me then, weren't you?" "Yes," I said, "I beat you properly on the ship. I carried the Duke's letters and my pistol cartridges, where you never suspected them. The letters which were in the satchel I forged myself after I got on board. If you'd not been a silly, you'd have seen that they were forged. So that was why, she said, those letters gave everybody more anxious work than you've any notion of. Oh, Martin, though, I helped to drug you to get those letters. It was terrible. Terrible. Will you ever forgive me? Why, yes, Aurelia, I said. After all, it was done for your king, just as I mean to run away from here to serve mine. All is fair in the king's service. Let us shake hands on that. We shook hands heartily, looking into each other's eyes. By the way, I said, where did you get to that day in Holland when I got the letters from you? Ah, she answered, you made me like a wildcat that day. I nearly killed you twice. You remember that low parapet on the roof? I was behind that, waiting for you with a loaded pistol. You were all very near your deaths that morning. In the king's service, of course. For just a minute, I thought that you would climb up to examine that parapet. What a crazy lot you all were not to know at once that I was there. Where else could I have been? Well, I answered, I beat you in the ride, didn't I? You thought yourself awfully clever about that horse at the inn. Well, I beat you there. I beat you in the race. I beat you with my letters to the Dutchman. I beat you over those forgeries. Yes, indeed, she said. I can beat all the men in your Duke's service. Everyone. Even clever Colonel Lane. Even Fletcher of Saltine. But a boy is so unexpected, there's no beating a boy, except with a good birch rod. You beat me so often, Martin, that I think you can afford to forgive me for tricking you once and bringing you here. I shall beat you in that too, Miss Caro, I said, for I mean to get away from you as soon as I can. So you say, she said. But we have clubmen walking all round this house all night, as well as sentries by day, guarding the stock. Your gang of marauders will find a rough welcome if they come for refreshments here. Even as she spoke, there came a sudden crash of firearms from the meadows outside the garden. About a dozen men came hurrying out of the house with weapons in their hands. Among them a big, fierce-looking, handsome man, who drew his sword as he ran. That is my uncle Travers Carew, said Aurelia. He owns this property. He wants to meet you. There came another splutter of firearms from the meadows. Come, she said. We'll see what it is. It is the Duke's men come pillaging. We ran through a gate in the wall into an apple orchard where the Carew men were already dodging among the trees towards the enemy. There was a good deal of shouting, but the tide of battle, as they call it, the noise of shots, the trampling of horses, had already set away to the left, where the enemy were retreating with news, as I heard later, that the militia held the abbey in force. The Carew men came back in a few minutes with a prisoner. He had been captured while holding the horses of two friends who had dismounted to drive off some of the Carew cattle. He said that the attack had been made by a party of 20 of the Duke's horse sent out to bring in food for the march. They had scattered at the first discharge of firearms, which had frightened them horribly, for they had not expected any opposition. The frightened men never drew rein till they galloped their exhausted horses into Shard Camp, where they gave another touch of dejection to the melancholy Duke. As for the prisoner, he was sent off under guard to Honiton Gaol. I don't know what became of him. He was one of more than 3,000 who came to death or misery in that war. They said that he was a young farmer in a small way, from somewhere out beyond Chitha. The war had been a kind of high-spirited frolic for him. He had entered into it thoughtlessly, in the belief that it would be a sort of pleasant ride to London with his expenses paid. Now he was ended. When he rode out with bound hands from the Carew house that evening between two armed riders, he rode out of life. He never saw Chiddock again, except in the grey light of dawn, after a long ride upon a hurdle, going to be hanged outside his home. Or perhaps he was bundled into one of the terrible convict ships bound for Barbados with other rebels, to die of small pox on the way, or under the whip in the plantations. After this little brush, with its pitiful accompaniment, which filled me full of a blind anger against the royal party, so much stronger yet with so much less right than ours, I was taken in to see Sir Travers Carew. He had just sent off the prisoner to Hong Kong, much as he would have brushed a fly from his hand. He had that satisfaction with himself, that feeling of having supported the right which comes to all those who do cruel things in the name of that code of unjust cruelty, the criminal law. He looked at me with rather a grim smile which made me squirm. "So," he said, "this is the young rebel, is it? Do you know that I could send you off to Honiton jail with that poor fellow there?" This made my heart die. But something prompted me to put a good face on it. "Sir," I said, "I have done what my father thought right. I don't wish to be treated better than any other prisoner. Send me to Honiton, sir." "No," he said, looking at me kindly, "I shall not send you to Honiton. You are not in arms against the king's peace, nor did you come over from Holland with the Duke. I can't send you to Honiton. Besides, I knew your father, Martin. I was at college with him. He was a good friend of mine, poor fellow. No, sir, I shall keep you here till the Duke's crazy attempt is knocked on the head. I think I can find something better for you to do than that fussy old maid your uncle could. But remember, sir, you have a reputation for being a slippery young eel. I shall take particular pains to keep you from slipping out of my hands. But I do not wish to use force to your father's son. Will you give me your word not to try to escape?" "No," I answered sullenly. "I won't. I mean to get away directly I can. Come," he said kindly, "we tricked you rather nastily. But do you suppose, Martin, that your father, if he were here, would encourage your present resolutions? The Duke is coming nearly unprepared to bring a lot of silly yokels into collision with fully trained soldiers 10 times more numerous. If the countryside, the gentry, the educated, intelligent men, were ready for the Duke or believed in his cause, they would join him. They do not join him. His only adherents are the idle, ignorant, ill-conditioned rogues of this county, who will neither fight nor obey when it comes to the pinch. I do not love the present king, Martin, but he is a better man than this Duke. The Duke will never make a king. He may be very fit for court life, but there is not an ounce of king in him. If the Duke succeeds, in a year or two he will show himself so foolish that we shall have to send for the Prince of Orange, who is a man of real strong wisdom. We count on that same prince to deliver us from James when the time is ripe. It is not ripe yet. I am telling you bitter, stern truth, Martin. Now then, let me have your promise not to continue in the service of this doomed princeling, your master." "Eh? What shall it be?" "No," I said, "that's desertion." "Not at all," he answered. "It is a custom of war. Come now, as a prisoner of war, give me your parole." "You said just now that I was not a prisoner of war," I answered. "Very well then," he said. "I am a magistrate. I commit you ad suspected person. Heart! Heart!" Here he called in a manservant. "Just see that this young Sprague keeps out of mischief. Think it over, Mr. Martin. Think it over." In a couple of minutes I was back in my prison cells, locked in for the night, with neither lamp nor candle. A cot had been made up for me in a corner of the room. Supper was laid for me on the table, which had been brought back to its place. There was nothing for it but to grope to bed in the twilight, wondering how soon I could get away to what I still believed to be a righteous cause in which my father wished me to fight. I slept soundly after my day of adventure. I dreamed that I rode into London behind the Duke amid all the glory of victory, with the people flinging flowers at us. But dreams go by contraries, the wise women say. I was a full fortnight, or a little more, a prisoner in that house. They treated me very kindly. Aurelia was like an elder sister. Old Sir Travers used to jest at my being a rebel, but I was a prisoner, shut in, watched, kept close. The kindness jarred upon me. It was treating me like a child, when I was no longer a child. I had for some wild weeks been doing things which few men have the chance of doing. Perhaps, if I had confided all that I felt to Aurelia, she would have cleared away my troubles, made me see that the Duke's cause was wrong, that my father would wish his son well out of civil broils. however just, that I had better give the promise that they asked from me. But I never confided really fully in her. I moped a good deal, much worried in my mind. I began to get a lot of unworthy fancies into my head, silly fancies, which an honest talk would have scattered at once. I began to think from their silence about the Duke's doings that his affairs were prospering, that he was conquering, or had conquered, that I was being held by this loyalist family as a hostage. It was silly of me, but although in many ways I was a skilled man of affairs, I had only the brain of a child. I could not see the absurdity of what I came to believe. It worried me so much that at the end of my imprisonment I became very feverish, really ill from anxiety, as prisoners often are. I refused food for the latter part of one day, hoping to frighten my captors. They did not notice it, so I had my pains for nothing. I went to bed very early, but I could not sleep. I fidgeted about till I was unusually wakeful. Then I got out of bed to try if there was a way of escape by the old-fashioned chimney, barred across as it was, at intervals by strong old iron bars. I had never thought the chimney possible, having examined it before when I first came to that house, but my fever made me think all things possible. So up I got, hoping that I should have light enough to work by. Chapter 22. The Peerest's Owl. It was too dark to do much that night, but I spent an hour in picking mortar from the bricks into which the lowest iron bar had been let. After a brief sleep, I woke in the first of the light at about 1 o'clock, ready to go at it again. My fever was hot upon me. I don't think that I was quite sane that day. But all my reason seemed to burn up into one bright point. Escape. Escape, at all costs, then, at the instant. I must tell you that the chimney, like most old chimneys, was big enough for a big boy to scramble up in order to sweep it. For some reason, the owners of the house had barred the chimney across so that this could not be done. They swept it, probably, in the effective old-fashioned way, by shooting a blank charge of powder from a blunderbuss straight up the opening. The first 2 iron bars were so placed that it was only necessary to remove one to make room for my body. Further up there were others, more close together. The fire had not been lighted for many years. There was no soot in the passage. There was a jackdaw's nest high up. I could see the old jackdaw looking down at me. Up, above her head, was a little square of sky. I did not doubt that when I got to the top I should be able to scramble out of that square onto the leads, then down by a waterspout, evading the sentries, over the garden wall to freedom. After half an hour of mortar picking, I got one end of the lowest iron bar out of its socket, then I picked out the mortar from the other end, working the bar about like a lever to grind the fulcrum into dust. Soon I had the bar so loose that I was able to thrust it to one side, leaving a passage big enough for my body. I was very happy when this was done. I went back to the room to make up a packet of food to take with me. This I thrust into an inner pocket before launching out of the hole. When I had cleaned up the mess of mortar, I started up the chimney, carefully replacing the bar behind me. Soon I was 7 or 8 feet above the room, trying to get at the upper bars. I was scrambling about for a foothold when I noticed, to my left, an iron bar or handle, well concealed from below by projecting bricks. I seized hold of it with my left hand, very glad of this. Support it offered, when, with a dull grating noise, it slid downwards under my weight, drawing with it the iron panel to which it was clamped. I had come upon a secret chamber in the chimney. There at my side was an opening big enough for a man's body. I was pretty well startled by it, not only by the suddenness of the discovery, but from the fear I had lest it should lead to some inhabited room where my journey would be brought to an end. I peered into it well, before I ventured to enter. It was a little low room, about 5 feet square, lit by 2 loopholes which were concealed from outside by the great growth of ivy on the side of the house. I clambered into it with pleasure, keeping as quiet as I could. It was a dirty little room, with part of its floor rotten from rain, which had beaten in through the loopholes. It had not been used for a great while. The pallet bed against the wall was covered with rotten rags, dry as tinder. There were traces of food. Who could say how ancient? In a dish by the bed. There was a little crucifix with a broken neck chain lying close to the platter. Some priest who had used this priest whole years before had left it there in his hurry. I wondered how. Something of the awe which had been upon him then seemed to linger in the place. Many men had lain with beating hearts in that room. The room seemed to remember. I have never been in a place which made one's heart move like that room. Well, the priest's fears were dead as the priest by this time. Nothing but the wreck of his dinner, perhaps the last he ever ate, remained to tell of him, beside the broken symbol of his belief. I shut to the little panel door by which I had entered so that I might not have the horrible fancy that the old priest's shaven head was peering up the chimney at me to see what I was doing in his old room, long since given over to the birds. As I expected, there was a way of escape from the hiding place. A big stone in the wall seemed to project unnecessarily. The last comer to that room had shut the door carelessly, otherwise I might never have found it. Seeing the projecting stone, I took it for a clue, feeling all round it, till I found that underneath it there was a groove for fingertips. The stone was nothing more than a large, cunningly fashioned drawer, which pulled out, showing a passage leading down, along narrow winding steps, just broad enough for one man to creep down at a time. The stairs were more awesome than the room, for they were dark. I could not see where they led, but I meant to go through this adventure, now that I had begun it. So down I crept cautiously, clinging to the wall, feeling with my feet as I went, lest there should be no step, suddenly, but a black pit, far down, into which a man might fall headlong, onto who knows what horrors. I counted the steps. I thought that they would never end. There were 37 altogether. They brought me to a dark sort of room, with damp earth for its floor, upon which water slowly dropped from some unseen stalactite. I judged that I must be somewhere under the bath chamber, not more than 10 feet from the abbot's old fish pond. If there was a way out, I felt that it must be to my left, under the garden, not to my right, which would lead back under the body of the house. Very cautiously I felt along to my left, till I found that there was indeed a passage, but one so low that I had to stoop to get along it. A few steps further brought me with a shock against a wall, a sad surprise to me, for I thought that I was on the road to safety. When I recovered from my fear, I felt along the wall, till I found that the passage zigzagged like a badger's earth. It turned once sharply to the right, going up a couple of steps, then again sharply to the left, going up a few more steps, then again to the right of one step more to a broader open stretch lit by 1 or 2 tiny chinks, more cheering to me than you can imagine. I guessed that I was passing at last under the garden, having gone right below the house's foundations. The chinks of light seemed to me to come from holes worn in the roof by rabbits or rats. They were pleasant things to see after all that groping in the blackness of night. On I went cautiously, feeling my way before me, till suddenly I stopped dead, frightened terribly, for close to me, almost within touch as it seemed, some men were talking to each other. They were evidently sitting just above my head in the cool morning, watching for me to come to my window, as I suppose. They were some of Sir Travers's sentries. A moment's thought told me that I had little to fear from them, if I moved quietly in my burrow. However, as my walk was often noisy, through stumblings on stones, I waited till they moved off, which was not for some minutes. One of the men was asking the other what was the truth about the Duke. "Why," his mate answered, "they say as he got beat back coming towards London. They say he be going to Bridgewater now, to make it a castle, like. Or perhaps he be a-coming to Taunton. They say he have only a mob, like, left to ain, what with all this rain. But I do'na know. He be very like to come here agin, so as us'll have to watch for our stock." "Ah," said the first, "they did say as there was soldiers come to Evilminster." so as to shut en off, like. I seed fires out that way, myself, like campfires afore it. Grew light. They do say the soldiers be all for the Duke. Yes, the other answered, he be very like to win if it come to a battle. He'd got on to London, I dare say, if the roads had but been dry. What do 'ee say to a bit of tabaxi, master? Said the first after a pause. Why, very well, said the other. At this instant, without any warning, something in the wall of my passage gave way, some bit of rotten mortar which held up a stone, or something of the sort. At any rate, a stone fell out with a little rush of rotten plaster, making a good deal of noise, though of course it seemed more to me than to the men outside. Whatever in the world was that? Said one of them. I don't know, said the other. It seemed to come from down below somewhere under the earth, like. Do you think as it could be a rabbit? It did sound like a stone falling out of a wall, came the answer. I don't know, where could it have come from? They seemed to search about for some trace of a rabbit, but not finding any, they listened for another stone to fall. I tell you what I think, said the first man. I believe as there be underground passages all over these here gardens. Some of them walk sound just as hollow as logs if you do stamp on 'em. There was very queer doings here in the old monk's time. Very queer. Some day I mean to grub about a bit, master. For my old grandmother used always to say as the monks buried a lot of treasure hereabouts in the old time. Ah, said the other. Then shall us get a spade quiet like, to see if it be beneath. The other hesitated, while my heart sank. I very nearly went back to my prison, thinking that all was over. No, said his comrade, us'll ask Sir Travers first. He doin' like people grubbing about. Some of his forefathers, as they call them, weren't very good. I do hear neither. He doin' want none of their little games brought to light like. After this, the men moved off to some other part of their beat. I went on along the passage quickly, till suddenly I fell with a crash down 3 or 4 steps into a dirty puddle, knocking my head as I fell. I could see no glimmer of light from this place, but I groped my way out, up a few more steps further on into a smaller, dirtier passage than the one which I had just left. After this I had to crawl like a badger in his earth, with my back brushing against the roof, over many masses of broken brickwork, most rough to the palms of my hands. All of a sudden I smelt a pleasant stable smell. I heard the rattle of a halter drawn across manger bars. I heard a horse paw upon the ground quite close to me. A dim but regular chink of light showed in front of me, level with my head as crawled. Peering through it, I saw that I was looking into a stable, almost level with the floor. The passage had come to an end. By getting my fingers into the crack through which I peered, I found that I could swing round some 6 stones, which were mortared together so as to form a revolving door. It worked with difficulty, as though no one had passed through by that way for many years, but it worked for me after a little hard pushing. I scrambled through the narrow opening into a roomy old stable, where some cart horses peered at me with wonder as I rose to my feet. After getting out, I shut to my door behind me so firmly that I could not open it again. There must have been some spring or catch which I could not set to work. 2 steps more took me out of the horses' stalls into the space behind, where, on a mass of hay, lay a carter, fast asleep, with the door key in his hand. By his side lay a pitchfork. He was keeping guard there, prepared to resist Monmouth's pillagers. He slept so heavily that I was tempted to take the key from his hand. Twice I made little half-steps forward to take it, but each time something in the man's look daunted me. He was a surly-looking man, who, if roused suddenly, in a locked stable, might lay about him without waiting to see who roused him. He stirred in his sleep as I drew near him for the 2nd time, so I gave up the key as a bad job. The loft seemed to be my only chance, as there was only this one big locked double door upon the lower floor. I clambered up the steep ladder to the loft, hoping that my luck there might be better, but resolved, if the worst came, to hide there in the hay until the carter took the horses to work, leaving the doors open. I had hardly set my foot upon the loft floor when one of the horses, hearing some noise outside or being moved by some evil spirit, whinnied loudly, rattling his halter. The noise was enough to arouse an army. It startled the carter from his bed. I heard him leap to his feet with an oath. I heard him pad round the stable, talking to the horses in turn. I heard him unlock the door to see what was stirring. I stood stock still in my tracks, not daring to stir towards the cover of the hay at the farther end of the loft. I heard him walk slowly, grunting heavily, to the foot of the ladder, where he stopped to listen for any further signal. If he had come up, he must have caught me. I could not have escaped, but though he seemed suspicious, he did not venture further. He walked slowly back to his bed, grunting discontentedly. In a few minutes he was sound asleep again, for farming people sleep like sailors, as though sleep were a sort of spirit muffling them suddenly in a thick felt blanket. After he had gone off to sleep, I took off my boots, in order to put them on under my stockings, for the greater quiet which that muffling gives to the tread. Then I peered about the loft for a way of escape. There were big double doors to this upper loft, through which the hay could be passed from a wagon standing near the wall. These doors were padlocked on the inside. There was no opening them. The staples were much too firm for me to remove without a crowbar. The other openings in the walls were mere loophole slits, about 4 feet long but only a few inches broad. There were enough of these to make the place light. By their light, I could see that there was no way of escape for me except by the main door. I was almost despairing of escape from this prison of mine when I saw that the loft had a hay chute leading downwards. When I saw it, I fondly hoped that it led to some outer stable or cart shed, separated from that in which the carter slept. A glance down its smooth shaft showed me that it led to the main stable. I could see the heads of the meditative horses bent over the empty mangers, exactly as if they were saying grace. Beyond them I saw the boots of the carter dangling over the edge of the trusses of hay on which he slept. I stepped back from this shaft quickly because I thought that I might be seen from below. My foot went into the nest of a sitting hen, right on to the creature's back. Up she started, giving me such a fright that I nearly screamed. She flew with a cackling shriek, which set all the blackbirds chippering in the countryside. Round the loft she scattered, calling her hideous noise. Up jumped the carter, down came his pitchfork with a thud. His great boots clattered over the stable to the ladder. Clump, clump, he came upstairs, with his pitchfork prongs gleaming over his head like lance heads. I saw his head show over the opening of the loft. There was not a second to lose. His back, of course, was still towards me, as the ladder was mercifully nailed to the wall. Before he turned, I slid over the mouth of the shaft, down into the hay rack of the old brute who had whinnied. I lit softly, but I certainly shocked that old mare's feelings. In a second, before she had time to kick, I was outside her stall, darting across the stable to the key, which lay on the truss of hay, mercifully left there by its guardian. In another second the lock had turned. I was outside, in the glorious open fields again. Swiftly but silently I drew the key out of the lock. 1 second more sufficed to lock that door from without. The carter was a prisoner there, locked safely in with his horses. I was free. The key was in my pocket. Yonder lay the great combs which hid Taunton from me. I waved my hat towards them. Then, with a wild, joyous rush, I scrambled behind the cover of the nearest hedge, along which I ran hard for nearly a quarter of a mile. I stopped for a few minutes to rest among some ferns, while I debated how to proceed. I changed the arrangement of my stockings. I also dusted my very dirty clothes, all filthy from that horrid passage underground. Now, I said to myself, there must be many ways to Taunton. One way, I know, leads along this valley, past Shard there, where the houses are. The other way must lie across these combs, high up. Which way shall I choose, I wonder? A moment's thought showed me that the combs would be unfrequented, while the valley road, being the easy road, which as I knew the Duke's army had chosen, would no doubt be full of people, some of them perhaps the king's soldiers coming up from Bridport. If I went by that road, my pursuers would soon hear of me, even if I managed to get past the watchers on the road. On the other hand, Aurelia would probably know that I should choose the Combray road. Still, even if she sent out mounted men, she would find me hard to track, since the combs were lonely, so lonely that for hours together you can walk there without meeting anybody. There would be plentiful cover among the combs in case I wished to lie low. Besides, I had a famous start, a 5-hour start, for I should not be missed until 8 o'clock. It could not then have been much more than 2:30. In 5 hours an active boy, even if he knew not the road, might put some 6 miles behind him. I say only 6 miles, because the roads were the roughest of rough mud tracks, still soft from the rains. As I did not know the way, I knew that I might count on going wrong, taking wrong turns, etc. As I wished to avoid people, I counted on traveling most of the way across country, trusting to luck to find my way among the fields. So that, although in 5 hours I should travel perhaps 10 or 12 miles, I could not count on getting more than 6 miles towards Taunton. Chapter 23. Free. For the first hour or two, as no one would be about so early, I thought it safe to use the road. I put my best foot foremost, going up the great steep combe, with Shard at my back. The road was one of the loneliest I have ever trodden. It went winding up among barren-looking combs, which seemed little better than wasteland. There were few houses, so few that sometimes, on a bit of rising ground, when the road lifted clear of the hedges, one had to look about to see any dwelling of men. There was little cultivation either. It was nearly all waste, or scanty pasture. A few cows cropped by the wayside near the lonely cottages. A few sheep wandered among the ferns. It was a very desolate land to lie within so few miles of England's richest valleys. I walked through it hurriedly, for I wished to get far from my prison before my escape was discovered. No one was there to see me. The lie of the valley below gave me my direction, roughly but closely enough. After about an hour of steady, fairly good walking, I pulled up by a little tiny brook for breakfast. I ate quickly, then hurried on, for I dared not waste time. I turned out of the narrow cart tracks into what seemed to be a high road. I dipped down a hollow, past a pond where geese were feeding, then turned to a stiff, steep hill, which never seemed to end for miles. The country grew lonelier at every step. There were no houses there, only a few rabbits tamely playing in the outskirts of the coverts. A jay screamed in the clump of trees at the hilltop. It seemed the proper kind of voice for a waste like that. Still further on, I sat down to rest at the brink of the great descent, which led, as I guessed, as I could almost see, to the plain where Taunton lay, waiting for the Duke's army to garrison her. There were thick woods to my right at this point, making cover so dense that no hounds would have tried to break through it, no matter how strong a scent might lead them. It was here, as I sat for a few minutes to rest, that a strange thing happened. I was sitting at the moment with my back to the wood, looking over the desolate country towards a tiny cottage far off on the side of the combe. A big dog fox came out of the cover from behind me, so quietly that I did not hear him. He trotted past me in the road. I do not think that he saw me till he was just opposite. Then he stopped to examine me, as though he had never seen such a thing before. He was puzzled by me, but he soon decided that I was not worth bothering about, for he made no stay. He padded slowly on towards Shard, evidently well pleased with himself. Suddenly he stopped dead, with one pad lifted, a living image of alert tension. He was alarmed by something coming along the road by which I had come. He turned his head slightly, as though to make sure with his best ear. Then, with a single beautiful lobbing bound, he was over the hedge to safety, going in that exquisite curving rhythm of movement which the fox has above all English animals. For a second, I wondered what it was that had startled him. Then, with a quickness of wit which would have done credit to an older mind, I realized that there was danger coming on the road towards me, danger of men or of dogs, since nothing else in this country frightens a fox. It flashed in upon me that I must get out of sight at once, before that danger hove in view of me. I gave a quick rush over the fence into the tangle, through which I drove my way till I was snug in an open space under some yew trees, surrounded on all sides by brambles. I shinned up one of the great yew trees till I could command a side of the road, while lying hidden myself in the profuse darkness of the foliage. Here I drew out my pistol, ready for what might come. I suppose I had not been in my hiding place for more than 30 seconds, when over the brow of the hill came Sir Travers Carew, at a full gallop, cheering on a couple of hounds, who were hot on my scent. Aurelia rode after him on her famous chestnut mare. Behind her galloped 2 men whom I had not seen before. In an instant they were swooped down to the place where the dog-fox had passed. The hounds gave tongue when they smelt the rank scent of their proper game. They were unused to boy hunting. They did not hesitate an instant, but swung off as wild as puppies over the hedge after the fox. The horsemen paused for a second, surprised at the sudden sharp turn, but they followed the hound's lead, popping over the fence most nimbly, not waiting to look for my tracks in the banks of the hedge. They streamed away after the fox, to whom I wished strong legs. I knew that with 2 young hounds they would never catch him, but I hoped that he would give them a good run before the sun killed the scent. I looked at the sun, now gloriously bright over all the world, putting a bluish glitter onto the shaking oak leaves of the wood. How came it that they had discovered my flight so soon, since it could not be more than 6 o'clock, if as much? I wondered if it had been the old carter, who had never really seen me. It might have been the old carter, but doubtless he drummed for a good while on the door of the stable before anybody heard him, or it might have been one of the garden sentries. One of the sentries might well have peeked in at the window of my room to make sure that I was up to no pranks. He could have seen from the window that my bed was empty. If he had noticed that, he could have unlocked my door to make sure, after which it would not have taken more than a few minutes to start after me. I learned afterwards that the sentry had alarmed the house at a little before 5 o'clock. The carter, being only half awake when he came after me, suspected nothing till the other farm hands came for the horses at about 6 o'clock, when, the key being gone, he had to break the lock, vowing that the Rattans had took his key from him in the night. My disappearance puzzled everybody, because I had hid my tracks so carefully that no one noticed at first how the chimney bars had been loosened. No one in that house knew of the secret room, so that the general impression was that I had either squeezed myself through the window or blown myself out through the keyhole by art magic. The hounds had been laid along the road to Shard, with the result that they had hit my trail after a few minutes of casting about. Now that they were after me, I did not know what to do. I dared not go on towards Taunton, for who knew how soon the squire would find his error by viewing the fox. He was too old a huntsman not to cast back to where he had left the road, as soon as he learned that his hounds had changed foxes. I concluded that I had better stay where I was throughout that day, carefully hidden in the yew tree. In the evening I might venture further, if the coast seemed clear. It was easy to make such a resolution, but not so easy to keep to it, for 15 hours is a long time for a boy to wait. I stayed quiet for some hours, but I heard no more of my hunters. I learned later that they had gone from me in a wide circuit to cut round upon the Taunton roads so as to intercept me, or to cause me to be intercepted in case I passed by those ways. The hounds gave up after chasing the fox for 3 miles. The old squire thought that they stopped because the sun had destroyed the scent. With a little help from an animal I had beaten Aurelia once more. When I grew weary of sitting up in the yew tree, clambered down, intending to push on through the wood until I came to the end of it. It was mighty thick cover to push through for the first half-mile. Then I came to a cart track made by woodcutters, which I followed till it took me out of the wood into a wild kind of sheep pasture. It was now fully 9 in the evening, but the country was so desolate it might have been undiscovered land. I might have been its first settler, newly come there from the seas. It taught me something of the terrors of war that day's wandering towards Taunton. I realize all the men of these parts had wandered away after the Duke, for the sake of the excitement, after living lonely up there in the wilds. Their wives had followed the army also. The wild population, scanty as it was, had moved off to look for something more stirring than had hitherto come to them. I wandered on slowly, taking my time, getting my direction fairly clear from the glimpses which I sometimes caught of the line of the highway. At a little after noon, I ate the last of my victuals near a spring. I rested after my dinner, then pushed on again, till I had one to a little spinney only 4 miles from Taunton, where my legs began to fail under me. I crept into the spinney, wondering if it contained some good shelter in which I could sleep for the night. I found a sort of dry, high-pitched bank, with the grass all worn off it, which I thought would serve my turn if the rain held off. As for supper, I determined to shoot a rabbit with my pistol. For drink, there was a plenty of small brooks within half a mile of the little enclosure. After I had chosen my camp, I was not very satisfied with it. The cover nearby was none too thick, so I moved off to another part where the bushes grew more closely together. As I was walking leisurely along, I smelt a smell of something cooking. I heard voices. I heard something clink as though 2 tin cups were being jangled. Before I could draw back, a man thrust through the undergrowth, challenging me with a pistol. 2 other men followed him, talking in low, angry tones. They came all round me with very murderous looks. They were the filthiest looking scarecrows ever seen out of a wheat field. "Why," said one of them, lowering his pistol, "it be the Duke's young man, as we seed at Lyme." They became more friendly at that, but still they seemed uneasy, not very sure of my intentions. "Where is the Duke?" I asked after a long, awkward pause. "Is he at Taunton?" They looked from one to the other with strange looks which I did not understand. "The Duke be at Bridgewater," said one of them in a curious tone. "What be you doing away from the Duke?" "Why," I said, "I was taken prisoner. I escaped this morning." "Yes?" they said with some show of eagerness. "Be there many soldiers hereaway after us?" "No, not many," I said. "Are you coming from the Duke?" "Yes," said one of them. "We left in at Bridgewater. We have been having enough of fighting for the crown. We've been marching in mud up to our knees. We've been fighting behind hedges. We've been retreating for the last week. So now us be going home. If us can get there. Glad if we never sees a fight again." "Well," I said, "I must get to the Duke if I can. How far is it to Bridgewater?" "Matter of 15 mile," they said after a short debate. "You'll never get there tonight, nor perhaps tomorrow, since we hear the soldiers be a-coming." "I'll get some of the way tonight," I said, but my heart sank at the thought, for I was tired out. "No, young master," said one of the men kindly, "you stop with us for tonight. Come to supper with us. They've rabbits on the fire." Their fortnight of war had given them a touch of that comradeship which camp life always gives. They took me with them to their campfire, where they fed me on a wonderful mess of rabbits boiled with herbs. The men had bread. One of them had cider. Our feast there was most pleasant, or would have been had not the talk of these deserters been so melancholy. They were flying to their homes like hunted animals after a fortnight of misery which had altered their faces forever. They had been in battle. They had retreated through mud. They had seen all the ill fortune of war. They did all that they could to keep me from my purpose, but I had made up my mind to rejoin my master. I was not to be moved. Before settling down to sleep for the night, I helped the men to set wires for rabbits, an art which I had not understood till then, but highly useful to a lad so fated to adventurous living as myself. We slept in various parts of the spinney wherever there was good shelter. But we were all so full of jangling nerves that our sleep was most uneasy. We woke very early, visited our wires, then breakfasted heartily on the night's take. The men insisted on giving me a day's provision to take with me, which I took, though grudgingly, for they had none too much for themselves, poor fellows. Just before we parted, I wrote a note to Sir Travers on a leaf of my pocketbook. Dear Sir Travers, I wrote, these men are well known to me as honest subjects. They have had great troubles on their road. I hope that you will help them to get home. Please remember me very kindly to your niece. After folding this very neatly, I gave the precious piece of impudence to one of the men. There, I said, if you are stopped, insist on being carried before Sir Travers. He knows me. I am sure that he will help you as far as he can. For this, the men thanked me humbly. I learned too that it was of service to them. It saved them all from arrest later in the same day. Having bidden my host farewell, I wandered on, keeping pretty well in cover. I saw a patrol of the King's dragoons in one of the roads near which I walked. The nets were fast closing in on my master. There were soldiers coming upon him from every quarter save the west, which was blocked too, as it happened, by ships of war in the Channel. This particular patrol of dragoons caught sight of me. I saw a soldier looking over a gate at me, but as I was only a boy, seemingly out for birds' nests, he did not challenge me, so that by noon I was safe in Taunton. I have no clear memory of Taunton, except that it was full of people, mostly women. There were little crowds in the streets, little crowds of women surrounding muddy, tired men who had come in from the Duke. People were going about in a hurried, aimless way, which showed that they were scared. Many houses were shut up. Many men were working on the city walls, trying to make the place defensible. If ever a town had the fear of death upon it, that town was Taunton then. As far as I could make out, it was not the actual war that it feared, though that it feared pretty strongly, as the looks on the women's faces showed. It feared that the Duke's army would come back to camp there, to eat them all up, every penny, every blade of corn, like an army of locusts. Sometimes, while I was there, men galloped in with news, generally false, like most war news, but eagerly sought for by those who even now saw their husbands shot dead in ranks by the fierce red coats under their drunken Dutch general. Sometimes the news was that the army was pressing in to cut off the Duke from Taunton, that the dragoons were shooting people on the road, that they were going to root out the whole population without mercy. At another time news came that Monmouth was marching into music, determined to hold Taunton till the town was a heap of cinders. Then one, bloody with his spurred horse's gore, cried aloud that the king was dead, shot in the heart by one of his brother's servants. Then another came calling all to prayer. All this uproar caused a hurrying from one crowd to another. Here a man preached fervently to a crowd of enthusiasts. Here men ran from a prayer meeting to crowd about a messenger. Bells jangled from the churches. The noise of the picks never ceased in the trenches. The taverns were full. The streets swarmed. The public places were now thronged, now suddenly empty. Here came the aldermen in their robes, scared faces among the scarlet, followed by a mob praying for news, asking in frenzy for something certain, however terrible. There several in a body clamored at a citizen's door in the like fever of doubt. There was enough agony of mind in Taunton that day to furnish out any company of tragedians. We English, an emotional people by nature, are best when the blow has fallen. We bear neither doubt nor rapture wisely. Our strength is shown in troublous times in which other people give way to despair. Chapter 24. The End. Among all the confusion, I learned certainly from some deserters that the Duke was at Bridgewater, waiting till his men had rested before trying to break through to the north, to his friends in Chester. He'd won a bad name for himself among his friends. Nobody praised him. The Taunton people, who had given him such a splendid welcome 10 days before, now cursed him for having failed. They knew too well what sort of punishment was sure to fall upon them directly the fighting came to an end. Somehow all their despairing talk failed to frighten me. I was not scared by all the signs of panic in the streets. I was too young to understand fully, but besides that I was buoyed up by the belief that I had done a fine thing in escaping from prison in order to serve the cause dear to my heart. My heart told me that I was going to a glorious victory in the right cause. I cannot explain it. I felt my father in my heart urging me to go forward. I would not have drawn back for all the king's captains in a company riding out against me together. I felt that these people were behaving absurdly. They should keep a brave, patient face against their troubles. Tomorrow or the next day would see us in triumph, beating our enemies back to London, to the usurper's den in Whitehall. It drew towards sunset before I had found a means to get to Bridgewater. The innkeepers who in times of peace sent daily carriers thither, with whom a man could travel in comfort for a few pence, had now either lost their horses or feared to risk them. No carriers had gone either to Bridgewater or to Bristol since the Duke marched in on the 4th day of his journey, nor had the carriers come in as usual from those places. The business of the town was at a standstill. I asked at several inns, but that was the account given to me. There was no safety on the roads. The country was overrun by thieves who stole horses in the name of the Duke or of the King. Nothing was safe anywhere. The general hope of the people was for Monmouth to be beaten soon or to be victorious soon. They had lost quite enough by him. They wanted the rebellion over. At last, just when I had begun to think the thing hopeless, I found an honest Quaker about to ride to Bridgewater with a basket of Bibles for the Duke's men. He did not ask me what my business at Bridgewater might be, but he knew that no one would want to go there at such a time without good cause. "Well," he said, "if you can ride small, you shall ride behind me, but it will be slow riding, as the horse will be heavily laden." He was going to start at 8 o'clock so as to travel all night, when the marauders, whether deserters from the Duke or ill-conditioned country people, were always less busy. I had time to get some supper for myself in the tavern bar before starting. Just as we were about to ride off together, when we were in the saddle, waiting only till some carts rolled past the yard door, I had a fright, for there, coming into the inn yard, was one of the troopers who had beguiled me from the Duke's army that day at Axminster. I had no doubt that he was going from inn to inn, asking for news of me. We began to move through the yard as he came towards us, the clack of the horses' feet upon the cobbles made him look up, but though he stared at me hard, he did so with an occupied mind. He was in such a brown study, as it is called, that he never recognized me. A minute later, we were riding out of town, past the trench laborers, my heart going pit-a-pat from the excitement of my narrow escape. I dared not ask the Quaker to go fast, lest he should worm my story from me. But for the first 3 miles, I assure you, I found it hard not to prod that old nag with my knife to make him quicken his 2-mile-an-hour crawl. Often during the first hours of the ride, I heard horses coming after us at a gallop. It was all fancy. We were left to our own devices. My pursuers, I found, afterwards, were misled by the lies of the landlord at the inn we had left. We were being searched for in Taunton all that fatal night by half a dozen of the Carew servants. Bridgewater had not gone to bed when we got there. The people were out in the streets, talking in frightened clumps, expecting something. After thanking the Quaker for his kindness in giving me a lift, I asked at one of these clumps where I could find the Duke. I was feeling so happy at the thought of rejoining my master after all my adventures that I think I never felt so happy. "Where can I find the Duke?" I asked. "I'm his servant. I must find him." "Find him?" said one of the talkers. "He's not here." "He's marched out, sir, with all his army, over to Sedgemoor to fight the king's army. It's a night attack, sir." I was bitterly disappointed at not having reached my journey's end. But there was a stir in the thought of battle. I asked by which road I could get to the place where the battle would be. The man told me to turn to the right after crossing the river. "But," said he, "you don't want to get mixed up in the fighting, master. There be thousands out there on the moor. A boy would be nowhere among all them." "Yes," said another. "Better stay here, sir. If the Duke wins, he'll be back afore breakfast. If he gets beat, you'd be best out of the way." This was sound advice, but I was not in a mood to profit by it. Something told me that the battle was to be a victory for us, so I thanked the men, telling them that I would go out over the moor by the road they had mentioned. As I moved away, they called out to me to mind myself, for the king's dragoons were on the moor, as a sort of screen in front of their camp. By the road they had mentioned I might very well get into the king's camp without seeing anything of my master. One of them added that the battle would begin, or might begin, long before I got there, if the mist don't lead in astray, like. It took me some few minutes to get out of the gates across the river, for there was a press of people crowded there. It was as dark as a summer night ever is, that is, a sort of twilight, when I passed through. But just at the gates were two great torches stuck into rings in the wall. The wind made their flames waver about uncertainly, so that sometimes you could see particular faces in the crowd, all lit in muddy gold light for an instant before the wavering made them dark again. Several mounted men were there, trying to pass. Among them, in one sudden glare, I saw Aurelia, on her Arab, reined in beside Sir Travers, whose horse was kicking out behind him. I passed them by so close that I touched Aurelia's riding habit as I crept out of the press. They were talking together, just behind me, as I crept from the town over the bridge above which the summer mists clung, almost hiding the stream. Aurelia was saying, "I only hope we may be in time." "Yes, poor boy," said Sir Travers. "It will be terrible if we are too late." It gave me a pang to hear them, for I knew that they were talking about me. I crept into the shelter of the bridge parapet while they rode on past me. The mist hid them from me. The town was dark above the mist, like a city in the clouds. The stars were dim now with the coming of day. A sheep bell on the moor made a noise like a night bird. A few ponies pastured on the moor trotted away, lightly padding, scared, I suppose, by the two riders. Then, far away, but sounding very near at hand, for sound travels very strangely in mist, so strangely that often a very distant noise will strike loudly, while it is scarcely heard close to, there came a shot. Almost instantly, the air seemed full of the roar of battle. The gunfire broke out into a long, irregular roar, a fury of noise which roused up the city behind me as though all the citizens were slamming their doors to get away from it. I hurried along the road towards the battle, praying as I went that my master might conquer, that the king's troops had been caught asleep, that when I got there, in the glory of dawn, I might find the duke's army returning, thanks in their enemy's camp. I pressed on along the rough moor road until the dawn came over the far horizon, driving the mists away so that I could see what was doing there. I saw a great sweep of moorland to my left, with a confused crowd of horsemen scattering away towards a line of low hills some miles beyond. They were riding. From the firing, which filled all the nearer part of the moor with smoke, among which I saw moving figures, sudden glimpses of men in rank, sudden men on horseback, struggling with their horses. The noise was worse than I had expected. It came on me with repeated deafening shocks. I could hear cries in the lulls when the firing slackened. Then the uproar grew worse again, sounds of desperate thuds marking cannon shot. I heard balls going over my head, with a shrill weep, weep, which made me duck. A small iron cannonball spun into the road like a spinning top, scattering the dust. It wormed slowly past me for a second, then rose up irregularly in a bound to thud into the ditch, where it lay still. I saw cannon coming up at a gallop with many horses on the bare right flank of the battle. Another ball came just over my head, with a scream which made my heart quite sick. I sat down cowering under a ruined thorn tree by the road, crying like a little child. It must have been a moment after that when I saw a man staggering down the road towards me, holding his side with both hands. He fell into the road, dead, not far from me. Then others came past, some so fearfully hurt that it was a miracle that they should walk. They came past in a long, horrible procession, men without weapons, without hands, shot in the head, in the body, lacerated, bleeding, limping, with white drawn faces, tottering to the town which they would never see again. I shut my eyes, crouching well under the tree while this fight went on. It was nothing but a time of pain, a roaring, booming horror with shrieks in it. I don't know how long it lasted. I only know that the shooting seemed suddenly to pass into a thunder of horse hoofs as the king's dragoons came past in a charge. Right in front of me, they galloped, hacking at the fleers, leaning out from their saddles to cut at them, leaning down to stab them, rising up to reach at those who climbed the banks. Under that tide of cavalry, the Duke's army melted. They fought in clumps desperately. They flung away their weapons. They fled. They rushed down desperately to meet death. It was all a medley of broken noises, oaths, stray shots, cries, wounded men. Whimpering, heard horses screaming. The horses were the worst part of it. Perhaps you never heard a horse scream. That morning's work is all very confused to me. I remember seeing men cut down as they ran. I remember a fine horse coming past me lurching, clattering his stirrups before leaping into the river. I remember the stink of powder over all the field, the strange look on the faces of the dead. The body of a trumpeter, kneeling against a gorse bush, shot through the heart, with his trumpet raised to his lips. The litter everywhere. Burned cartridges, clothes, belts, shot. All the waste of war. They are in my mind, those memories, like scattered pictures. The next clear memory in my mind is of a company of cavalry in red coats under a fierce, white-faced man bringing in a string of prisoners to the king's camp. A couple of troopers jumped down to examine me. One had the face of a savage. The other was half drunk. "You're one of them," they said. "Bring him on." They twisted string about my thumbs. I was their prisoner. They dragged me into the king's camp, where the white-faced man sat down at a table to judge us. I will not talk of that butchery. The white-faced man has been judged now in his turn. I will say no more of him. When it came to my turn, he would hear no words from me. I was a rebel, fit for nothing but death. Pistol him was all the sentence passed on me. The soldiers laid hands on me to drag me away, to add my little corpse to the heap outside. One of the officers spoke up for me. "He's only a boy," he said. "Go easy with the boy. Don't have the poor child killed." It was kindly spoken, but quite carelessly. The man would have pleaded for a cat with just as much passion. It was useless anyway, for the colonel merely repeated, "Pistol him," just as one would have ordered a wine at dinner. Burgundy. No, the Burgundy here is all so expensive. Never mind Burgundy. So I was led away to stand with the next batch of prisoners lined against a wall to be shot. My place was at the end of a line, next to a young sullen-looking man black with powder. I did not feel frightened, only hopeless, quite hopeless, a sort of dead feeling. I remember looking at the soldiers getting ready to shoot us. I wondered which would shoot me. They seemed so slow about it. There was some hitch, I think, in filling up the line. A man had proved his innocence or something. Then, the next instant, there was Aurelia dragging the white-faced man from his table. I dimly remember him ordering me to be released, while Sir Travers Carew gave me brandy. I remember the young, sullen-looking man's face, for he looked at me, a look of dull wonder, with a sort of hopeless envy in it, which has wrung my heart daily ever since. "Mount," said Aurelia. "Mount, Martin. For God's sake, Uncle Travers, let us get out of this." They were on both sides of me, each giving me an arm in the saddle, as we rode out of that field of death through Zoyland village towards the old abbey near Shard. I shall say little more, except that I never saw my master again. When they led him to the scaffold on Tower Hill, I was outward bound to the West Indies, as private secretary to Sir Travers, newly appointed Governor of St. Eulalie. We had many of Monmouth's men in St. Eulalie after the bloody assizes, but their tale is too horrible to tell here. You will want to know whether I ever saw Aurelia again. Not for some years, not very often for 9 years, but since then our lives have been so mingled that when we die it will be hard to say which soul is which. So much our spirits are each other's. So now, I have written a long story. May we all tell our tales to the end before the pen is taken from us. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey, the characters, and the world they carried with them. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows more timeless books to be shared with listeners around the world. Until next time, thank you for listening.